Watercolour hair can seem really tricky to tackle. How do you make it look real? How do you not make it look stiff? How do you not make it look dull? How to bring it to life? Curly, dark, fair, straight? I have a big reveal. Painting watercolour hair is actually pretty easy and enjoyable if you know how to break it down. And I am going to do exactly this in this video, after which you'll never doubt yourself again when you have to paint this subject in watercolour. So stick around and let me show you how in a few easy to follow steps. By the way, my name is Fiona De Pinto, this is Drawings in a Drawer, and on here we discuss everything watercolour. So if that is something you think you might enjoy, be sure to click that notification bell so you won't miss any of my future videos. And now, let's get right into it. You might not expect some of the colours I will use to paint hair, and that is because we are forgetting to observe what we are seeing and we are painting what we have in our mind's eye or from memory. Thus our idea of what hair looks like won't always be true to life because we tend to distort things when we think about them. What we think hair looks like won't always be useful when it comes to painting hair. Indeed, it might even get in the way. I know a lot of you wouldn't like me completely skipping the painting process for the face, so here is some footage. But I will keep it down to a minimum and I will take the opportunity to start talking about watercolour hair immediately. I almost always paint the hair when I have a good foundation for the features, a good idea of the light and shadow and general complexion. Why? That's because when we're halfway or 3/4 of the way through, it's good to have the contrasting frame that hair offers us to assess whether we need to push shadows more in the face. And very often when we start painting the hair, we will find that we have to go back into the face because things will start looking a bit too light and undefined. My step 1 is to just paint in the whole area of the hair with a watery mix of the lightest colour I want to see in the hair. I might or might not pop in just a few highlights at the end, but I know this first wash is going to act as my highlights. This first wash never gets covered up completely by the following layers. Not only will it work as an underpainting, but it will also help us create the idea of light and luminosity. It's our lightest value. And when you've got that laid down, take out your heat tool or hair dryer actually. Let it dry naturally. It doesn't matter how you do it, but your paper must be bone dry before you move on to the next layer of paint. My step 2 is going in with a mixture that is gradually getting thicker and darker. I said gradually, so please don't mix something that feels like toothpaste. Your mixture should have the consistency of milk. If we go in too thick at this stage, we will reactivate this layer when we go over it with our next one. When we start our second layer, we want to start thinking of the hair in sections. We are carving out single strands. We are beginning to get in the idea of volume and definition. I personally like adding lots of playful swirls and spirals if the hair is slightly wavy. Make sure not to cover up your first layer. Leave slivers of that first layer showing through and make sure the direction of them makes sense. That these slivers of light, let's call them, follow the direction of the strand. My step 3 is repeat. Dry your paper. Create a mix that is a little darker and a little thicker, not too thick yet, and continue without covering up either of the previous layers completely. Now we are beginning to see the hair slowly come to life. It's always that third value that does it. Step number 4 is not actually a step, but what I think is necessary to make hair look realistic. Close to the face and by the neck, by the ears, the hair will appear darker. So these areas will probably have very little of the under layers showing through. It's simply harder for the light to reach these spots. Make sure to blend your hair with your clean damp brush to soften those strands. So as I said in the beginning of this video, your hair won't end up looking stiff or unnatural. While you are doing this, you can also take the opportunity to lift some paint out in areas that would catch the light. You do this by pressing your clean, almost dry brush to the paper and dragging it along as if you were mopping up a puddle. We can all relate to that, I think. After the first 3 layers, you will have got that 3-dimensionality in, and you can continue to add shadow and definition where you need it most, making sure your paper is dry and the paint flows smoothly. I'm going to apologise for the very non-aesthetically pleasing appearance of my palette you'll see now, and for the state of my voice. I had a cold while filming this, but I want to leave in the observations I made out loud while I was starting to dig into unusual colours we use in watercolour hair. You can definitely see some green in her hair, and I'm going to put some here. I haven't painted her hair or drawn her hair exactly in the same direction as I can see it in the photograph for some reason. I didn't think it was crucial, but adding those green or blue highlights is so realistic when it comes to watercolour blonde hair especially, because it does tend to catch the reflection of light surrounding it, but not only of light, anything that's around there, like grass or the sky or lights, artificial lights that surround her. So adding these highlights is going to add that extra level of, let's call it realism, though realism is not a painting style that I am into, but we will call it getting something to look real or realistic even when we are expressive, which is totally possible. Even blues as well as greens, but even pinks and violets will appear in the hair, will be reflected in the hair. So make sure to just observe. And now I will leave some music for my favourite moment, and that is when I pop the highlight into the eyes. On to my second painting. I went for very different hair so we could experiment with a completely different technique. As before, I am including some footage of the face, which I start with a violet underpainting, which will allow this beautiful rich skin tone I want to build to literally glow layer after layer. With very curly hair, in this case I'm painting dark hair, it is possible to rely more on the wet and wet technique, which means painting with wet paint on a wet surface. And we can be a little less controlled. So yeah, now you will get to see some footage of me painting the face before I move on to explaining how I painted the hair. Starting with the same underpainting of violet I used for the skin to remain cohesive, I start to layer rich brown on top of that with small, almost random brush strokes that will give the impression of movement and bounciness. As I create patches wet with my paint and go over them, not only will some of the patches of brush strokes spread into one another, because wet paint spreads to wet areas on the paper, but we will also begin to see some darker and some lighter areas. And I can then go in and drop another brown into the damp paint, and again it will spread in an organic manner, automatically creating this tight curl effect and the idea of light and shadow. While the paint is drying but still damp, I move my brush again in little swirls and spirals, almost like doodles, to create what I'm going to call the outer layer of the hair so that the viewer's eye can read its beautiful texture. I'm not afraid to literally drop little puddles of watercolour into the damp surface and let it do its thing, and then I reach for the colours. Again, hair will very often reflect the colour of the sky. I played around a little and, as you can see, added some cerulean blue. I later went in with Mint by White Nights, which is one of my go-to colours, and even pink. I used a sort of dotting technique at times, and other times I used splatters by tapping the handle of my paintbrush with my forefinger. Here you can see me softening the outline of the hair with my clean brush so that we don't get that cut out and pasted effect with a silhouette that would look way too sharp. I would definitely advise you to play around with this, but to always remain loose. I use slightly thicker paint to add in these loose curls and loose strands of hair. You will see me go back into the first painting to add these in there too. I always do. I simply love how this frames the face. To do this, as I said, you will use a thicker mixture of paint, which still flows easily on the paper, something like the consistency of cream. I also use lifting technique with my clean damp brush in the eyes, but I will also use it around the hair to pull out some really natural looking highlights. As I said earlier, you will see me do this. Also, I will use a white gel pen to add some more highlights to the hair in both paintings, and to the eyes and lips as well, of course. So you see, painting hair with watercolour must seem a little easier to you now. Let's remember that for the first portrait, I let each layer dry before I moved on to the next one, while for the second one, I worked more wet and wet and added my little spirals over the effect that this created, just to give it that extra bounce. Please let me know in the comments if you found this helpful. I really love reading all your comments and I appreciate them so, so much. By the way, that's the fox that we painted for our live painting session in the Lunar Black tier. If you want to paint foxes, owls, or even portraits, everything's coming. We have a session every month and I record it as well. So if you can't be there for the live, you can always catch the recording later. Remember to join my Facebook group. If you're the Pintos watercolour students, that's where we all get together and share the work we've done, and it's super nice to be on there. It's a lovely community, lots of feedback from really interesting artists, so definitely join my Facebook group if you're on Facebook, and I will see you next week. Bye for now. Keep painting, keep painting.